Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Null News. Now, as you know, last week I was not feeling real great, and that persisted through most of last week. Today, I'm probably about 80% better, so it should be much better. All right, as I like to start out all of these, just for clarity's sake, as if somebody needs it, all the opinions I'm sharing today are those of my own. I'm not paid by anybody. I don't represent the people I work for, past, present, or in the future. These are just my comments. Hey Gregory, how are you doing this morning? I hope all of you had a fantastic weekend. I hope that you're looking forward to having a fantastic week as well. All right, so let's jump into my clickbait title. This is continuing on with a Docker. I'm getting a little annoyed because I feel like people are super entitled not to pay for anything that they use. Docker desktop is used heavily across a lot of things. And if you're looking for direct substitutes, I only really know of two which are kind of direct. I think Minikube does everything that Docker Desktop does and can be run on Windows and Mac. Don't quote me on that one because I believe it can be without Docker Desktop. I've never run it without Docker Desktop. That's the only thing that comes to mind. And then the other one that comes to mind on that is Rancher. Let me see if I can't pull that up. Rancher has it's a work in progress of a Rancher desktop. It's not exactly a. Let me show you this. It's not exactly a alternative, but it is close. So there's this Rancher desktop, so you can check it out. It's really geared towards running Kubernetes, not necessarily containers, whereas Docker is more geared towards running containers and not Kubernetes. Now I know that in Docker desktop you can run Kubernetes, but let me be clear really quickly here is that for your small company making less than $10 million or less than 250 employees, Docker Desktop is still free. Nobody needs to flip out and change their home setup. If you're using it at home, it's fine. All they're asking is that large enterprises that make a ton of money off of containerization pay for it. So I don't really think that this... And this is why I say open source is the death of open source, is that nobody can really decide. A lot of people use open source because they don't want to pay for stuff. And I think that's actually the really wrong reason to use open source. It's not the reason I contribute to open source. It's not the reason that I support it as much as I do. For me, it's about community and helping other people. So there can really be no death to it. And this is another reason I don't get why some people are like, oh, I don't want people to make money off of my code. And this is why they use really restrictive licensing. Well, I don't care. If you can make money off of the code that I've written, more power to you. You're a magician because I write some really horrible code. But that's being said, this is just kind of some of my... I've been a little disappointed in the open source community as of like the last year, to be honest. But that is that, and we can move on. We don't need to cover that anymore. I just wanted to have I needed to tell somebody about it. You guys are somewhat my sounding booth. I don't know what the terminology for that is. English is difficult. All right, let's move on. There is one high security vulnerability that you all should really be aware of, especially if you use VM Center. Now, I'm assuming that they contacted you if you are an admin for vCenter. But it's one of those that probably should have gotten a 10, except I never found any that actually got a 10. for their security. It's like a 9.8, I believe this one is. Anyways, this is a very high security vulnerability which allows arbitrary exploit of files. So anyways, if you're in VMware Center, you should check this out. And that's pretty much it for security. Yeah, that was it from what I saw this week. There's some things in the cloud that go towards like compliance, like backup and restore, which you could always say is security related. A lot of things are security related. I try to keep the security to pretty much CVEs and things like that. So, all right, so let's talk about cloud. We have just a couple of things, but one thing that was pretty big and very interesting. That's not this. This is this is big. So if you don't know, OpenTelemetry is pretty much something that's been birthed in the Kubernetes landscape, or CNCF, which I really don't like saying CNCF because it means just about anything that's Go, made with Go. But it was created in this ecosystem, and basically OpenTelemetry is a set of APIs and SDKs and interfaces that you can use to instrument your application or hardware and stuff. And it's really gaining traction, and that's why this is a big deal, is because AWS is even bringing support to OpenTelemetry with all of their stuff. And this is really good because it means that you're allowed to use one set of APIs for everything. Even your vendors like Datadog and things like that are implementing OpenTelemetry. And so this is really good because we're all standardizing on one set of API calls, and it's really awesome. Sorry, my cough is not quite gone. Like I said, not 100%, but I'm very close. Lemongrass tea. It really helps, but it's not the most tasty. All right. So this now offers inline regular expressions. I have actually never used AWS WAF, but it looked interesting if you do use it, and it looks like it solved a problem if you do use WAF. All right, this is probably the biggest one. Backup for GKE. Now, I actually have a couple thoughts on backup and restore of a highly available system. So this comes down to the topic of what's highly available. When you're talking about highly available, there's this weird thing like if your service is truly highly available, do you need to back up and restore it? Because if, let's say, your control plane is across 3 different data centers, the answer is probably still yes. But it's an interesting thought if you could provide something that is highly available enough that you don't actually have to back up and restore it. Not saying you should ever do that. Just saying that's a concept. Anyways, GKE brought in to itself, created a full end-to-end, which is actually more than anybody else, AWS and Azure, provide. Basically, it's a one-stop shop for backing up and restoring your clusters. And it even appears, I love how Google Cloud's own thing says it's another sign of GKE maturity and momentum. Anyways, it's like a sales pitch right here in their blog. I would have preferred more technical things. But anyways, it looks to be an all-inclusive, not only back up your control plane, but also your persistent volumes on the nodes. So I haven't actually tried it and used it and know all the ins and outs of it, but it's definitely something to be looking forward to, especially in the sense of compliance. It's very important to show that your data is safe and secure, and safe and secure involves also knowing that it's not going to go anywhere. If it's expected to be persisted, it's actually persisted. I know I covered this before, but Azure had nothing else, so I figured I'd throw them a bone and say that they have better firewall. So yeah, they have a better firewall. We'll move on. That was really Basically, Azure Firewall capabilities, and they are actually really, really good. So I give them kudos for that. They have the best firewall that I've seen so far as configurability and things like that. So it's definitely worth using if you're in Azure. All right, and that's really it for the cloud news. We're going to move on to just some random open source stuff. And we'll start with Postgres 14. I loved this blog article that I found because I've used Postgres and I like Postgres. And if I wanted a relational database, it would probably be a Postgres database. That being said, it's not like Kubernetes with me. If you ask me a Kubernetes release, I can go into on its release notes and have probably looked over its release notes. That's not me with Postgres. I'm not that excited about it. Don't want to go over in depth. And this person did a really great job of taking the highlights of Postgres 14, why it's important, and why all of these little things that don't really sound like a big deal really improve the experience of Postgres. And it goes with some JSON, so their NoSQL support, not really NoSQL, but anyways, so their JSON-B support has really expanded, as well as their command line tool, the CLI client, has really gotten, as well as query pipelining, which is something, basically, I don't actually understand query pipeline. I need to read that. I need to read more into query pipelining in the future, but it supposedly sounds really cool. Like I said, there's too much information for us all to be experts on everything. And I didn't really understand what they meant by query pipeline, because basically it was that you didn't have to get an okay before you sent another request, which then opens my mind into the CAP theorem, and I really have to understand better what they're saying. Now, maybe this is a database term I probably should know, but to me, it didn't stand out that I understood exactly what they were meaning and why it was a big deal. But anyways, I also really loved this one, the read-only role. So basically, you could provide, let's say you had a service that only ever needed to read only from the database. This is pretty cool, and it makes doing the security better. Again, Postgres 14 seems like it's all about the little things, which are really good. All right. All right, so I actually had a friend of mine ask me about what Kubernetes distribution would I recommend if you're talking about a local environment. And I think that answer comes down to K0s at this moment. I've gone back and forth on how I would do it. I definitely wouldn't recommend using the Kubadium approach because that's a little too batteries not included. And for most of us, we don't want to actually be dealing with the base Kubernetes as little as possible, at least. And that being said, I think that K0s brings the perfect amount of very little friction, and it supports, even at this point, the very latest Kubernetes release. And it's very featureful, and it's very easy to use, and it supports a bajillion ways of actually running Kubernetes, whether you want to run it in containers, in VMs, or on bare metal. It pretty much supports it all and has Ansible playbooks or things like that to support the different ways of deploying it. So I really like it as far as I'm going to say like a pseudo enterprise way of running it. I'm not talking about on your desktop to start up a new cluster and whatnot. You all know that I use Kind and Minikube for that wholeheartedly. And you could use Minikube for probably the same thing that I'm talking about. But K0s gives you a much better way of managing those clusters, especially because I run a couple at home. And now I run more than just K0s clusters, but I have started to switch more predominantly to K0s. I think that it's a fantastic development and kind of home production. In fact, I hope to be bringing, once I get to making videos again, because I've really been focusing on work and not dying. Once I get back to making videos and I get my next 2 class videos out, I'm probably going to be making a home deployment for like a very serious home, like actually exposing it to the internet. video, and I'll be using K0s because I've been really, really liking it. All right. So I apologize for coughing into the microphone. I'll try not to do that. All right, Ubuntu did something pretty cool, and I'm wondering if this was actually related to. They have a big customer or client that requested it. I'm not really sure. But Ubuntu increased support for 14.04 and 16.04 to 10 years. Now, if you remember in version 18, they rolled out this 18.04, got this extended. So everything is used to be just 5 years. And then at 18, they said, hey, we're going to support this one for 10 years if you pay for the extended support. Which in itself was cool and a really good step for enterprises. And just a couple days ago, like a week ago, honestly, a day after last week's news, or on the Monday that I gave it, actually, they released that they were extending this to their older versions as well. So your 14.04 and 16.04 are actually still in support if you're wanting to pay for that. Very cool. And anyways, if you're a Ubuntu user or any of the derivatives, people will be like, oh, I'm a Pop! OS user or whatnot. They're built on Ubuntu or Debian and actually benefit a lot from what Canonical does there. All right, I found this interesting. A lot of people struggle, or a lot of open source struggles to actually be supported. Most of my contributions to open source aren't actually supported. They're just something that I do because I feel strongly about it. That being said, this is a way for people to give shares of stock to support your favorite open source project. Now, my personal favorite way of supporting open source projects is to actually hop on GitHub and use their sponsors. It goes 100% straight to them, and I sponsor a couple people that just do cool little projects that I like to support. So if you haven't actually supported an open source project, either pay for Docker Desktop, or more appropriately, go out on GitHub and find the project you use the most and sponsor those developers. Do $1 a month. Or you can give them some stocks. I feel like this is probably more for rich people that really want to donate and skip the capital gains tax. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. All right. So bring your own host support for Windows nodes to Red Hat OpenShift. That's a mouthful. So basically, this allows you to bring your Windows nodes into an OpenShift cluster. I guess as they are talking about, these are more pets instead of cattle, which means if you're bringing in a Windows node, you're going to actually be looking at babying it a little bit more. It's not something, basically, as far as I'm understanding here, OpenShift doesn't actually support managing the system or any of the OS. They just support running containers on it. So that system is very much a pet in that you'll need to actually bring your own and manage your own host. Whereas OpenShift classically tries to manage all of that for you. So this article goes on to more of what pets versus cattles are and all of that. And if you want to read it, I'll link it. But anyways, just understand that basically you can bring Windows Server and Windows containers into your OpenShift cluster. I actually think that this is probably a bigger deal to more legacy developers. It won't really affect me myself, but anyways, it's out there. And if you have a Windows Server based application and are looking to bring it to Kubernetes, this now gives you a solid way. Now, Windows support has existed for a while, but the only people I know that supported it well prior to this has been Azure itself. So anyways, so this gives another option instead of running in Azure. Oh, this I found very interesting. I found very, very interesting. For one reason, and I don't know if this doesn't strike anybody else, but when I read this, Google preps local recovery option for Chrome OS that requires only a network connection. Now, I don't understand what a local recovery option that requires internet connection. Like, to me, those things are polar opposites. If you require a network connection, it's most likely not a local recovery option. And if it's a local recovery option, why do you need network connection? I don't understand this. If somebody does, I don't use Chrome OS either. I much prefer just actually Linux. But if somebody understands this, do let me know in the comments, because I don't. Okay, big news for Rust. This should excite everyone. Huge news for Rust. GitHub Advisory Database now supports Rust. So basically, this is their vulnerability database that they cover and maintain all of the CSVs, and their tools, and you think about their bots that will let you know of security advisories, are going to now be able to do this for the Rust projects. So this is really cool, and if you use those things, you're going to start being able to see Rust, and yeah. Very good. Very cool. So I know probably not a ton of you use Rust. You know that I'm a huge supporter of Rust. I know that I haven't made videos on Rust like I promised, but I will make a video on Rust because I promised and because I love Rust and I love writing Rust. Yeah, I haven't made them yet. It's been a long year. Nothing like horrible. Everything horrible happened last year. This year has just been a long year coping with everything. All right. So this is something interesting. This is. All right. So it turns out back in 2017, I actually was in charge of making a piece of hardware that ran Android. So I can attest to absolutely everything that's written in here. And what it is that developing a piece of hardware that runs Android is absolutely the worst. And basically what would happen before what's trying to be happen now is that there's Linux that is forked by the Android kernel. Then the Android kernel is forked by the vendor. And so this is actually the person making the CPU. And then the person making the device with all the other device firmware would also fork the kernel. And then it could stop there, but it could also be that the person making the device is not the very end user, and somebody like me gets that kernel instead. This is pretty much my first foray into Linux. And it was this mess right here. So basically there's like 4 levels of forking the kernel before it got to me, who was making and supporting the device. And it's actually quite a mess. Oh, well, there's some ads for you. Well, we'll move on. But it's really quite the mess. And basically Google is strong-arming people into making this better. And basically they're upstreaming the contributions to, and so having an upstream first contribution model where everybody needs to hold to the same pattern and contribute it to the same kernel. For the most part, there's still some caveats, but it is much better. Hey, I'm sorry, guys. Chat was not, all of a sudden, all the chat messages came. So if I have a not referred to your chat, basically I didn't get anything. Yeah. Let's say all you need is a flash drive at least 8. Are you talking about the offline recovery for Chrome? The local recovery? anyways, all I was finding is that, yeah, internet is still required, which means it's not really, to me, a local recovery. But yes. Sorry, anyways, chat was not coming through. I'm sorry. It still says that my concurrent viewers are 0. So I don't know. It's been like this for like 2 or 3 weeks when I will be chatting with people, and Google still doesn't actually think that anybody's watching. So maybe you guys have all the video turned off. I know that I have a face for radio, but that's a little rude still. A little rude, not going to lie. Anyways, the chats were not coming through until all right now. They all just came up. So anyways, thanks for chatting. Sorry, I was not ignoring you. Anyways, that is, yeah, that's the Android open source project in a nutshell. And it was actually worse before that. So before Oreo, Android 7 or 8, I forget which one was Oreo. Before Oreo, it was actually even worse than that because you had subsequent forking, and Google actually fixed that at that point. Anyways, it's been a while, and it's getting better, and so that's good. All right, let's get back to this. I found a new open source. Invertase. Anyways, I don't actually know this company at all, but they have open sourced their Notify, which is a notification library for Android and iOS. And it's licensed under the Apache 2, and they make it a point that they don't actually plan on charging for it. They're not trying to sell this anyway. They're just trying to give to the community. So basically, go check it out if you want. It's under a great license, fully support that license. And yeah, it looks interesting. So if you want notifications with React Native on iOS and Android, and I suppose if it's React Native, I don't know what notifications would look like on desktop, but I don't know. React Native is desktop too, so I mean, should work, right? All right, so Firefox is looking to see if Bing will pay it more money than Google for its search. Google pays them quite a bit right now, so but I guess basically they're seeing if people will complain too much, because I wonder if they're already in talks with Bing. I think it would be a good chunk for Bing because Bing is only used by very few people. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, if you start seeing Bing as your search engine on Firefox, you can actually change it back if you'd so like. So you can just go into your settings and change it to Google. I guess it's less than 1% of the people. So for the few of us that actually use Firefox, I'm not sure how many of us will actually see it. I have not seen it myself, and I use Firefox on like 3 machines. So yeah. This should have been in the security. I have this out of order. But there is if you use Chrome, the Firefox alternative, there's a high severity CVE, so you should definitely be updating your Chrome. Always update your web browser. Your web browser is your gateway to the internet, and it's like one of the very first things to be hit. So always update it. So let's talk about some open source. Today I have a fine curated list of that just escaped. AWS open source. And I don't mean open source sponsored by AWS. I mean people that made cool things that help you in AWS. So this is the CDK NAG. So it's an open source tool that basically just checks CDK applications for best practices using a combination of rules. All right, so basically it's inspired by this, which if you guys don't know what CFN is, this is CFN NAG, very good tool. But anyways, this is all around the CDK. And so if you use that, definitely check it out and use it. Then there's the CNF alarms here, which it just is a tool for creating CloudFormation alarms based on resources for a cloud. If you guys don't know what CloudFormation is, this is an AWS concept. It's like Terraform, except it only works for AWS. So think Terraform, AWS. I think it's more powerful if you're sold on AWS. I think it's more powerful and useful than Terraform if you're solely on AWS. So anyways, there's this. So this is a very cool project. You should check it out. Then there is MLOps Basics. This was actually really cool. This is kind of a small course that somebody put together, setting up a project in AWS and doing machine learning on it. So if you're interested in setting this all up in a cloud infrastructure and whatnot, I would definitely check it out. This person did a really cool job with it, and it's really well presented. So I'm only on the second step. I think a second step. So I'm not that very far through it myself. So yeah, definitely check it out. Here is the AWS Lambda adapter. So basically, if you don't know what that is, because it's a mouthful, it helps you break or not really break up. I think of it as breaking up, but it helps you run your web application on AWS Lambda without making any real changes. Now, I haven't actually used it, but it's a cool concept because a lot of times when you think of your web application, you have this API backend and you'd almost have to like copy and paste sections out into the Lambda, and this looks to basically do that translation for you. So pretty cool. It has this Lambda adapter that allows you to communicate with the Lambda service. Anyways, again, haven't seen it or haven't used it, but it's interesting. And that's what I'm bringing you in these projects. Here's Java 17. So if you don't know, Java 17 has come out, and this is support for Java 17 in the AWS Lambda. So it doesn't have main support from AWS yet, but this person brought AWS 17. So this is pretty cool. And then finally, last is Rancher Desktop. For all of you guys, this is not AWS at all. I just mentioned it. I think I showed this to you guys anyways. In the Rancher sandbox. Now, I'll have to tell you, Rancher has a unique way of doing open source. Rancher's open source isn't because they like a community. Rancher doesn't do open source for community or anything like that. They have a very unique take. And I'm not saying that I dislike or like it. It's just very interesting. Yeah, so don't read too far into these statements. Rancher's take on open source is we'll make a bunch of products or projects. And if they get enough stars, on GitHub, stars is one of their biggest things that they look for, they will make a product out of it. So Longhorn got enough stars, and now they have an enterprise support of Longhorn. They made a product out of it. This is why they do, I think that the founder of Rancher is very vocal about this, is that this is how they and why they do open source. Is it allows them to iterate quickly and see what people like. If they don't get enough stars, they drop the project. They stop supporting it and stop doing anything to it. This is why they do open source, which I think is kind of interesting because it's a completely different take on open source. The cool thing, and one of the things that I really like about Rancher when they do this, is the fact that it's all Apache 2 and open source. So even though Rancher they do provide support for, and they did make a product for it, a product you can buy support for, they didn't actually make it so that you couldn't run it without that support. The support is still the thing that they're selling. So anyways, I encourage you to support the open source projects, whether it's your own time that you work on it, whether it's evangelizing for it, or making tutorials and things like that, or actually writing code, or giving them money. So go support your open source project. All right. I'm sorry, chat has not been working. I don't know if you guys wrote anything more or if I have any viewers at all. That's been the state of YouTube for a while now. But if you've gotten this far, please like and subscribe to this video, or don't subscribe to the video, but like the video. If you haven't subscribed, you just listen to me talk for about an hour without subscribing, and I give you kudos to you. Thanks. Always let me know if there's more or interesting things that you would prefer to be covered in this. I continue to try to make this better and more interesting for you guys, as well as a little bit shorter, because I realize this can go on for a long time. My English is not great. I would switch to a different language if I spoke a different language. But anyways, my English, it's not great. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate all of your guys' support, and yeah, I love your guys' support, and you guys are actually quite fantastic. And hopefully I'll be releasing those videos that you guys have been wanting very, very shortly. With that being said, have you guys a fantastic week. I look forward to seeing you next week. Next Monday, I'm going to be on point, and we're going to have a fantastic news section that's been better than this time.